This is a mega webinar, a major debate or a discussion. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce the best CPA trainer in the world.
Where do I send the check for that wonderful introduction? Best thing about Trump is I've got a lot of DJ mixes, right? So you remember that song "Pump Up the Volume"? It's no longer Trump up the volume, Trump up the volume, Trump, and now no longer pump up the jam. Remember "Pump Up the Jam"? It's now Trump up the jam. You got to trump it up, don't you know? Trump it up. So I like it because it's good for my DJing. There wasn't many DJ mixes with Kamala. Like I couldn't get anything with Kamala, but I had a lot with Trump it up, Trump up the volume.
2025 is the year for CPAs. What are the topics that you would suggest a student must do because these topics are likely to be tested?
They don't want people to gravitate towards something that's not their area.
Some of us at least are wishing it happens, is the CPACBEP.
We have a course just for the acronyms. My wife just said, go downstairs, do something useful, because your manager might tell you, hey, you know what? 2 months from now, let them go out and find somebody else. Businesses sometimes are viewed negatively, they don't pay their fair share of taxes. But lo and behold, it didn't work out that way. You guys are doing a spectacular job, and there's just tremendous respect across the firms and across the country for the service you all provide. So thank you. It's been invaluable to our profession.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to EduMart. Welcome to our session here today. This is a mega webinar and in some ways a major debate or a discussion that we're going to have with a few legendary folks right here. So it gives me immense pleasure, as always, to introduce the man who is my hero, the best CPA trainer in the world, Mr. Peter Olinto.
Oh my goodness. How can I possibly thank you enough? Where do I send the check for that wonderful introduction? Ron, you're too kind, my friend. Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see all of you.
I'll give you the mailing address. You can send the check over to my phone.
Gotta love it.
All right. Why don't we play that music Peter needs, huh? Yeah?
That was nice. That's it. That's my song, everybody.
Yep, that's Staying Alive by me. Okay.
Great way to start the day.
Yeah, great way to start the day. I have many a times used this song to wake myself up in the morning. All right. With that being said, let me also introduce Shubir Khattu from UWorld, who's a senior director for business development and is a key partner for us here at EduMart. Shubir, you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be with you, Rohan and team on this lovely webinar. And Peter, of course, lovely seeing you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I also have my co-faculty with me, Mr. Shubham, right here. Many of you already know Shubham because you've taken classes with him. Shubham is also going to be taking up some questions here with us, and it's going to be a faculty discussion essentially. So we'll have Peter, we'll have me, we'll have Shubham, we'll have a discussion here. The topic for today is why CPA 2025 is the year for CPAs, and why is it a good year to begin your journey? So to talk about this, we've decided to have a discussion in a few segments. So we've broken up discussion down into 3 parts. Firstly, we're going to talk about what are the major changes in 2025, in which we're going to talk about, of course, the rule changes that have happened or that are about to happen. We're also going to talk about the content that has changed, the testing patterns that have changed, everything that is of importance for a student who is looking to take up their CPA seriously in this year. The second segment will be about the study pattern that is most suited for this year and the new content. And lastly, we'll talk about CPA in the market as such, which is a more generic section. So if you're not somebody who's taking up their exams right now, then you might want to hang out and stick around till the end, because the last segment, which is CPA and market, might be the thing that is most interesting to you. With that being said, I'd like to begin with my first question, if my co-panelists were to allow. May I?
Let's go.
Let's go. So the first question I have for you, Peter, is what is the most important topic that we can expect, or what are some of the most important topics that we can expect in 2025?
Now, do you mean specifically with respect to content or just in the industry itself, CPA, exam type overall?
I'm talking in terms of the exam. So specifically from the exam point of view, what are the topics that you would suggest a student must do because these topics are likely to be tested?
Oh yeah. Well, the good news is, the same topics that mostly have been tested since I sat for the exam long time ago. Really no new major additions. So your typical audit, your tax. I know a lot of people get concerned with a new president and anticipated changes to the tax law. You all could rest easy for 2025 because first it has to be enacted into law. Nothing's changed yet. And then there's usually like a 6-month delay on average before it becomes testable on the exam. So good news from a tax perspective. It's going to be more or less the same as what you saw in 2024 with obvious updates for changes to certain standard amounts that get changed each year for inflation or what have you. But really just your financial accounting and reporting, your cost and managerial and your audit and your econ and your ISC for those of you who are interested in the ISC section. I mean, a lot of this, they've worked out the kinks in 2024. So I think we're probably in a lot better shape right now this year than we were this time last year with a lot of uncertainty regarding the changes to the exam that came into effect at the beginning of 2024.
Right. So usual topics that are usually tested are the ones that are to be studied properly because they will be seen in the exam. But there's nothing special as such for 25. And I really appreciate the fact that you've mentioned to sort of curtail the frenzy that students feel, because Trump's the new president in the US, so everybody's probably feeling tax is going to change, which it will probably, but it's going to be a long while before it hits the CPA exam directly. And
That is
it's
correct.
bound to affect your life. All right, fair enough. And as far as FAR is concerned, anything specific that you think is highly tested in FAR? Like, for example, I know that revenue recognition is a highly tested topic in FAR. So anything like
Yeah,
that?
so that's kind of getting, like these things. So leases changed a few years ago. Then that was kind of the hot topic. And obviously the revenue recognition changes, but really very predictable for FAR, especially. So the topics that have long been tested, the leases, the bonds, consolidations, different things that, year in, year out, they've tend to focus in on, obviously making sure you understand how to do adjusting entries. So some basic fundamentals there, but really from our perspective, there's just certain topics year after year that lend themselves well to task-based simulations, right? So anything that has multiple parts to a solution. So if you look at like the statement of cash flow lends itself well because they can test in a task-based simulation, hey, we want operating, then another question, investing, then they want the financing, changing cash, ending cash, all that kind of good stuff. So that all that is very predictable that we can help you through. So there's no guesswork on your part when you're studying certain topics that lend themselves well to multiple choice, more like the definitions, the terminology. But when it comes to analysis, application, then it starts to become a little bit more, okay, this could be tested multiple choice, but lends itself well to task-based simulation. And Rohan and his team do an outstanding job in advising you all when you study that, hey, make sure you understand the steps involved here because you could see that in more of a problem type setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then the second question is more of a question where we can contemplate a little bit. We can discuss a little bit. The second question is, has the option or how has the option for specialization rather uh, been effective in the real world? Do you think it's
Yeah,
had real world implications yet?
Well, that's a great question. So the major criticism for you all out there who are wondering why did they have such significant changes? Why did they have that evolution that began last year in 2024? I guess the criticism of the US CPA exam had been it's too academic, right? So that ironically, if somebody had 2 or 3 years experience doing audit or tax, you would think they would be advantaged on the exam, right? Well, as it turned out, not only weren't they advantaged, many times they were disadvantaged because the exam, too academic in nature, didn't really mirror what someone was doing as a first or second year associate. So they said, listen, we need to change the exam to make it more practitioner based. So they reduced the multiple choice, increased what we call the task-based simulations that are really supposed to simulate what someone would do as a first or second year, right? So that's the thought. Makes a lot of sense. I think the problem has been, mixed feedback, starting with the pass rates, right? So you would think that the pass rates would have been relatively similar because we would never want anyone choosing a discipline based upon, hey, that's got a much higher pass rate than another discipline. So I was telling people a year ago and more, you know what, I would guess that the, relatively small, maybe plus or minus 5 points between the disciplines, because they don't want people to gravitate towards something that's not their area of focus in their career. But lo and behold, it didn't work out that way. So the bar exam had about half the pass rate of the TCP discipline. So what's happening now, unfortunately, is a lot of folks who are going the audit path. And as an employer, it would be in that employee's best interest that, hey, if you're on the audit side, but you're going to be doing IT, maybe you should do some do the ISC discipline, or if you're not a techie, but you're audit, then let's go the bar. A lot of technical accounting rules tested there could be helpful in your career. But because the bar exam, the passing rate, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit, was like in the 40s, and then TCP was in the 80s, we have the problem now that a lot of folks who are on the audit side are not sitting for ISC or bar because they want to take TCP because the pass rate's so high. And ironically, I make the rounds to, the top 10 firms all over the US and talk to them regularly. Well, what's your advice to your new hires? Do you have a strong opinion as to what discipline you would like them to sit for? And overwhelmingly, surprisingly, the firms are like, hey, we just need them to get certified sooner rather than later. We're going to leave it up to them. So even if they're on the audit side, but hey, you feel confident with the tax, go ahead and sit for TCP. So that completely negates the entire argument for having disciplines that was supposed to help you in your career path. So I'm hoping, and we are hoping, that those pass rates will somewhat converge so that people, again, will pick a discipline based upon where they foresee themselves a year or two down the road. So time will tell.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very valid point. And it should be this way. I mean, it should be your interest, your area of application where you'd work that you choose instead of just where can I pass more easily. But it's becoming that.
Well, I will tell you, for the folks out there, Rohan and his team do a great job. So, we generally encourage people, FAR being a relatively academic exam, it's a core exam. It's a good indicator of where you might want to, sit what discipline, right? So if you do really well in FAR and you like the math, I like the math because it's very objective, right? A balance sheet balances or it doesn't. And if it doesn't balance, you know exactly why and how to fix it, right? Whereas sometimes the audit, the theory topics, ironically, no math involved, but that can make it a little bit more challenging because it doesn't necessarily add up so easily, right? So, Rohan and his team do a great job. Hey, if you do really well in FAR, you enjoy that. Well, there's a high correlation between your performance in FAR and bar. If you barely pass FAR, you didn't like all the math, chances are you want to stay away from bar, right? If you enjoy the audit, a lot of overlap between the audit and the ISC. So, you might want to think about that as a discipline. And then on the tax side, it's a no-brainer. I mean, if you like the tax and that's what you do for a living, then TCP is going to be your calling, no doubt.
Yeah. Okay, on to more complicated things. One of the biggest changes that we are anticipating, that hasn't yet happened, but we're all anticipating, and or some of us at least are wishing it happens, is the CPA CBEP, which is the CPA competency-based experience pathway, which is one of the worst names I've ever heard for a thing. Frankly,
I had to look at that about 3 or 4 times. I had to call Eric Shubir. I mean, with all the acronyms, CPA, what?
What is that?
Competency based. Experience pathway, yes.
Yeah.
We have a course just for the acronyms in the profession.
Yeah, you need to speak AICPA to be able to understand what that is. It is like that.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a country that came up with CARES Act. These are guys who are good at naming things,
This
but
is true.
somehow this is CPA, CBEP. Anyway, but it is a pretty cool thing. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're able to get your license with just 120 credits, that basically means we've lowered the exit barrier for people who are exiting and becoming CPAs ultimately. And I think, especially in India, it'll have a very positive impact because our graduations are 3 years. And now, as per our new policy, new education policy, there is the option that we could elect for a 4 year graduation, which would earn us the 120 credits. But most folks would just do a 3 year grad, which means we had 90 and we had to go out there and do a whole master's out just to get the credits necessary to get a license. So we're really looking forward to the CPACBEP happening, even though it's not a cool or fancy sounding thing. It certainly is a cool thing. What is your take on it, Peter?
So just for the folks out there that are wondering, that competency-based experience pathway was an alternative to the traditional, at least in the past 15 years or so, that, hey, you had to get 150 credit hours. Now, the ironic thing about that was they said, well, hey, the extra 30 credit hours will make you more, you're getting more education, and, it should be a good thing and make you a better professional, better judgment, except that the extra 30 credit hours could be in tennis and golf and yoga and what have you. So that made no sense, right? Originally, when I thought the extra 30 credit hours, and I was like, listen, if it's a very rigorous curriculum where they're making you, do more tax and audit and what have you, and even if it would have just been economics related, if you were studying, topics in finance, valuation, something in business would make sense. Well, that didn't happen. So they lost a lot of credibility, I think, once they started allowing the extra 30 credit hours to be in anything. But if you're in a rigorous master's program, that does add a lot of value. And back in the day when I got licensed, it was either you had a bachelor's degree, 120, and then most states you had 2 or 3 years work experience. But then if you had a master's degree, not 150, but a master's degree, something business related, well, then you know what? All you needed was 1 year's of work experience. And back then you started at a higher salary because you forego a year of income, right? And then obviously you're laying out money to get that master's degree. Well, they changed it. Everyone needed the 150, and there was a lot of pushback because obviously there's the foregone income in that year, plus what you have to lay out to pay for those extra 30 credit hours. And then if they're in nonsense, golf and yoga, what is that doing for anyone? So rightfully, they looked at this and they're very receptive now to changing this. Just for the folks out there, though, the way things work in the US, NASBA and the AICPA can make recommendations, but they're not the decision maker. The ultimate decision maker is the individual state that grants the license. So it's up to that state board of accountancy to say whether or not they want to change it. But they're understanding the profession, and they, want to give respect to the board, AICPA, what have you. So what's happening is the competency-based experience pathway, well, they really put a lot of emphasis on scrutinizing what it was you're going to be doing as a working professional. Okay, so if you want to forego that 5th year of education, they want to make sure that you have these professional competencies. You're acting and understanding your ethical obligations. Are you doing things on the job that require critical thinking skills, effective communication, technical competencies, whether it be in assurance services, tax engagements, financial reporting. But that puts a big burden on the firms then to look and scrutinize what those employees are doing at the firm to make sure they're meeting that competency-based experience pathway. So the firms are not too happy about that because that shifts the burden to them, right? Yeah. And they're not going to count internships towards that either. So the states, Ohio has been the first to say, listen, we're going back to the old rules. Back when I did it in the 80s, it's like if you have a master's degree, then you only need 1 year's work experience. If you have a bachelor's degree, then you need 2 years work experience, period. End of story. So Indiana, it looks like, is going to follow suit with Ohio. Now the question becomes reciprocity. So in the United States, you're a CPA in the state of New York, let's say, you don't need to get licensed in the other 49 states. You're a CPA, you can do most of the work, regardless if you travel on engagements throughout the US. You can't sign off, though, lawfully on an audit report, use your credential, unless you're licensed in that state. But that's usually when you get to the higher level, senior manager, obviously partner. Yeah. But some states are saying, listen, we don't agree with Ohio and Indiana. We may not grant reciprocity. If somebody wants to come work in our state, we may not allow them to do so because they haven't come to an agreement yet as to what all the states are willing to accept to grant that reciprocity. But it does look like there's a lot of momentum behind the old rule coming back. If you've got the 150 or master's, then 1 year work experience. If you only have 120 credit hours, a bachelor, then either 2, some states had 3, 2 or 3 years work experience. But they do recognize the need to change. So it's changing. It's just a matter of exactly how that's going to change in each and every state. That's where there's still a lot of debate.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So essentially, there is this possibility that 120 credits will be able to get you a license, but you might need not 1, but 2 years of work experience.
Correct. Correct. Yes, sir. And then if you have the master's or 150 credit hours, now states may decide, well, if the extra 30 credit hours, you're not getting a master's, if I were the state board, I would say, well, I don't want to see golf and tennis and yoga on your transcript. It's got to be something business related, right? So that's still up in the air. How they're going to scrutinize, is it truly a master's in accounting, a master's in taxation? What exactly is that master's? But if it goes back to the old rule, it was just a master's degree, business related, obviously, and then you had the 1 year work experience. So, the universities here, though, are pushing back a little bit. They're very worried about the MAC program, the Masters in Accountancy programs in the U.S., because now, obviously, there's going to be far less people, possibly, who are going to want to get an extra year of academics and pay that to get a master's in accountancy, because the firms have not yet said that they're going to pay more to somebody who's invested in their education. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, if they truly go back to that, there was an income differential when you started. If you started with a master's degree, you got paid a higher amount. And then eventually it converged. By the time you got to manager, it was all about work, performance, work-related experience. But the first 2, 3, 4 years in your career, you at least had an opportunity to have a payback period for the money that you invested in getting the master's plus the foregone income. I don't know if that's going to happen now. And if the firms are not willing to pay more for somebody who invests in a master's degree, logically then, why would you get the master's, right? So even though it's rigorous and there are great programs in the US that do an incredible job, the firms need to see and recognize that. And they do have data, Rohan, so they know folks historically who got a master's degree tend to stay at the firm longer, tend to be promoted more quickly, tend to add more value. So now if that's truly the case, they got to show that with the money, right? Show me the money. So when you start, you got to have a higher income to reimburse you for what you've invested in your education. Otherwise, why would people do it?
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. If it were to be that way, though, that's the question. Anyway,
yeah.
With that being said, I get your point that you too, if I were to sort of paraphrase, you too see that it would be an advantage if people were allowed with 120 credits to get a license. Lowering
without
the
a doubt.
barriers.
Look, we learn on the job. I'll be honest with you. When I graduated law school, passed the bar exam, very high grades, I didn't even know how to fill out a summons and complaint. You learn a lot of those practical skills on the job. I mean, it was incredible. Like, practical skills. What the education shows is that you have the aptitude to learn what you're going to be taught on the job, right? So, at the end of the day, I think experience and then combined with continuing education, that now you have a basis of, okay, I understand, I've seen this on an engagement. Now the education resonates more because you can see how it relates to particular assignments you've had in the past, right? And then the next time around, you do it that much better. But I think they've got to open up that additional pathway. Look, we all know the pipeline problems. We're losing a lot of candidates that otherwise would have sat for the CPA, but flat out financially to pay for 30 extra credit hours, even if it's in golf and whatever, but then you got the opportunity cost, you're giving up a year's salary. That's a hell of an investment to make. So a lot of those bright people say, you know what, I'm going to try to get a job on Wall Street. I'm going to go finance, or I'm going to go IT, or do something else. So we don't want to lose those good candidates. So we got to make the profession more attractive again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a very positive note. Well, that being said, my next question is a little bit about what you already answered, actually. My question was, why do you think NASBA and AICPA are suggesting this change? And to a
Well, you know
certain
what's
extent,
great
I think
about
you answered it. But
Yeah,
go
you know
ahead.
what? I got to give them credit. The AICPA and NASBA regularly solicit opinions from practitioners. So
Yeah,
back in December, there's a vote, like they came up with what they thought made sense with the competency based. And to their credit, I mean, you know, that some people agree, some people disagree strongly, and they're willing to take it all in, right? And then try to make the best decision overall that they can bring to the state boards. And hey, overall, here are the pros and cons and the recommendations, etc. But to their credit, they are responsive to the practitioners, to the needs of the industry, obviously to the employers, the public accounting firms, etc. So they are willing to listen, be flexible, and do what's necessary to make, you know, the profession the best that it could be. Look, we obviously serve a very important role in the markets, and they recognize that. So yeah, no, good. Kudos to them, because they're good
yeah,
people there. They work hard. They want to do what's right. And I think ultimately there will be, there's going to be a give and take. But I think overall, most states will come to an agreement with the AICPA, NASBA on what's the best pathway overall, so we can ensure that reciprocity.
yeah. Yes, I agree. This is pretty good that AICPA and NASBA are taking up the initiative to make it so that more and more people enter the profession and more people
Correct.
exit the profession gracefully. Absolutely.
I do have one question. See, in 2024, CPA evaluation came into picture. Then now CPABEC is into picture. So, is there any possibility that CPA exams difficulty level will decrease in near future?
Well, that's interesting, right? So we spoke about those pass rates. To give everyone just a little background, let's just go through the three core sections. Last year, I don't have the fourth quarter data, but audit was pretty consistent between the first, second, and third quarter. In 2024, pass rate was approximately 45, 46%. That was pretty consistent over those three quarters. The FAR exam historically has had a lower pass rate. So in the first quarter, that was 42%, then it was 40, and then it was 39. But overall, about 39, 40%. That's to be expected of FAR. Reg historically has been on the higher end. First quarter was 63, second quarter 63, third quarter 63. So you can see audit kind of was always in between the FAR and the bar. And a lot of that has to do with volume of content, my friends. You can't study for each exam the same way. Each exam, unique content, format, structure, volume of information. FAR historically takes more time to study for than audit, which doesn't have much math. So it's not surprising, those pass rates. What's been interesting, though, the disciplines. So 2024 bar was 43 in the first quarter. Then it dropped to 40 in the second quarter and stayed at 40 in the third quarter. So you're looking at bar exam at about 40. The opposite end of the spectrum, TCP, 83 in the first quarter. Then it dropped to 75 in the second quarter, then dropped to 73 in the third quarter, because they recognize you are completely defeating the purpose of the disciplines if you're going to have audit people sit for TCP, because it has such a high pass rate. So notice the correlation between FAR and bar, higher end of difficulty, reg and TCP, higher pass rates, and then in the middle, audit and ISC. The ISC discipline stayed at about 50% the first quarter, but then that went up. Then it went to 57 in the second quarter, and then it went up to 61 in the third quarter. So really, they've got to find a way to have bar converge with that TCP. So there's not a 30-point difference in those pass rates, or almost a 40-point differential. So do I expect anything to get more difficult? I would like to see the pass rates between bar and TCP converge towards ISC, which is in the middle. So people, again, are choosing the discipline that's going to benefit them in their career rather than the short term, right, decision making, which is I just want to pass the exam as quickly as possible. And I think TCP has a higher pass rate, so I'm going to take TCP. Because if they keep it that way, I don't see the purpose then in having the disciplines, right? It completely makes no sense if audit people are going to sit for TCP. So I would anticipate that we would see more convergence, but time will tell in 2025.
Okay, fair enough. So essentially, nothing seems to be getting easier, but it seems to be this way that some of these subjects are getting higher pass rates, like, for example, TCP, which is astonishingly high, frankly. But they would probably get a bit more difficult and the pass rates might converge, is the point.
Yes, sir. And I think there just for the first quarter of 2024, when they moved content around from the old exam to the new exam, some people who sat for reg under the old format and studied certain content that then got moved to TCP, they got tested on the same topic twice. So that explained, we thought, a lot of that big, pass rate in that first quarter, that 83%. So it's gone down by 10 points. So it went from 83 to 73. So some of that problem probably was attributed to the content, exact same content being tested twice. Now, that shouldn't happen anymore. So there has been a 10-point decline in the TC pass rate. Now, is it going to go from 73 to 63? I don't know, waiting for those fourth quarter results to come out, but it did go from 83 to 73.
Yeah. It's also possible, just a thought here, it's also possible that folks who really like tax are the ones who are taking up TCP. If you like something, chances are you're good at it. So it's just the folks who are good at tax who are taking up the TCP exam and are naturally going to be able to pass it.
Well, you would think, though, that would be limited to the tax professionals, right? But get this, Rohan. So the number of candidates sitting for TCP went from 680, and then in the third quarter, 1,500.
What?
So, yeah. And the number of candidates sitting for bar, that went from 700 down to 682, then came back up to 900. But TCP, so there looks to be a correlation between the candidates sitting for a particular part and what that pass rate is. Like ISC has been growing. So, we still don't have enough data, right? It's a relatively small sample size. We're looking at only 3 quarters, but it'll be interesting to see if those trends continue. And again, I don't see how the AICPA and NASBA can allow this to continue. That 72, 73 versus 40 is too big of a gap. It's just too big of a gap. So why, but look, like I said before, though, if you really enjoy the FAR, I like the math. I don't mind the math. And if you enjoy cost and managerial, if you understood consolidations and leases and governmental and FAR, well, that gets tested again in bar. So there's a lot of overlap in that content that you could take advantage of if you do well in FAR. But if you don't do well in FAR, the only bar I would be in is the kind that's serving drinks. Outside of that, I wouldn't be going to the bar.
Yeah, sounds about right. Okay. The sixth question I have is, have there been any noticeable or notable changes in the testing patterns compared to those observed in 24 for CPA aspirants? Again, I think you've somewhat answered this question, but okay, let's give it another shot. Any noticeable testing trend changes that you've seen?
No, so very predictable, like I said. So in performance-wise, historically, reg has been, even under the old exam, 2023 and earlier, the reg exams usually had the highest pass rate, audit just below that, and then FAR historically was on the lower side. BEC is gone, so that's irrelevant. Like I said, the biggest surprise, we were not surprised that the pass rate in bar was lower than the pass rate in ISC. We weren't surprised by that. ISC having a lower pass rate than TCP. Some people were a little surprised in that because there's no math involved. But the biggest surprise was the divergence in pass rates between bar and TCP. So, like I said, I think we'll keep an eye on that. But we still encourage candidates really to choose a discipline long term. Don't think so short term. Think long term. What's going to best serve you in the long run in your career? Help you to move up within the firm, etc. But ironically, Rohan, I would be honest. I thought the firms would be taking a little bit more of an active role and saying, "Listen, audit folks, we're hiring you to do audit. What in the hell are you studying for TCP for?" But I haven't seen that. Not only haven't I seen that, it's been like, hey, just get through the exam. So if you think TCP is going to be easier for you, God bless. Go figure.
Yeah, exactly. The industry hasn't essentially responded the way we all academicians had hoped. They would give it weightage. They would ask you questions about it in the interview. None of that is happening. So that's a bit weird. But that's how it is. We think what we think, and then it plays out the way it does.
Exactly right.
That's how it is. Okay, with that being said, we've come to the end of the first segment. Now we shall move on to the second segment where we talk about specifically the study patterns. And question 7, which is about what should be the plan of action for a student who is starting their journey in 25. So if you've just started your journey or you're appearing for your first exam in 25, what should be the plan of action? How should they approach the exams? Is there a pattern that you would recommend as to, start with FAR, then move on to audit, then go with reg? Or is it something else? Peter, it's on to you.
Yeah, no, I think the first step is, what order do you think is going to be best for you? And I generally start that off with 2 big buckets. There's a significant minority of candidates that want to start with their easiest part because they lack confidence. They want to get off to a good start. I've passed the part. You get that momentum going, and then it gets you engaged in the process because now the clock begins to tick. You have either 30 or 36 months, to pass your remaining 3 parts. I get that. But most candidates who know that they're going to do it's a decision based upon, logic. Whatever is most academic, that the longer you're out of school, the harder it's going to be to pass. Let's start with that. Also, when your first part is unique because there's no time pressure, 0. That clock of opportunity, that 30 or 36 months doesn't begin to close until you've passed your first part. So part number 1 for me, whatever you think is going to be hardest for you, which for most candidates is FAR, just given the volume of information, let's do FAR
and
first.
The low pass rates.
Yeah, exactly. And making sure you allocate enough time, right? So every student's unique. How long have you been out of school? 2 weeks or 20 years. What did you get in advanced accounting, an intermediate 1 and intermediate 2? Were you an A student or a C student? A lot of that information, your team does a great job meeting with each candidate and saying, hey, based upon your track record, you may need 150 hours. Somebody else might need 180, somebody else 120, right? So that first part, putting together a plan logically, and then if you need more time, you got it. But once you get that first part done, FAR is a great barometer, as we've already said. If you like FAR, you pass FAR, you did well in FAR, and you're on the audit side, then BAR might make a lot of sense for you. You might want to sit for BAR second because of the overlapping content between FAR and BAR. Conversely, you sit for FAR, you didn't like the math all that much, you barely passed, you got a 76, 77, 78, I would probably say stay away from BAR. So if you're on the audit side, then I would be thinking a lot about ISC. So once you get those results for FAR, you contact us. We're your partner the whole way through. So that you get those results, we'll give you some feedback and recommend what you might want to do second after you take FAR. The other major change for the core sections of the exam, you're going to get your results so much faster. So in 2024, it was hard to tell a candidate, well, let's see how you do in FAR because they didn't get their results for 2 or 3 months. Yeah. Now we're back to the typical normal 10 days, 2 weeks. You're not really waiting all that long. Let's see how you do in FAR, right? Now for the tax people, it's a no-brainer. You're going to sit for FAR first. You're probably going to sit for audit second. Why? Because very academic. You're not going to be doing audit for a living. So before you're out of school a long time and forget everything you learned, let's do FAR audit. Then you'll do your reg, and then you'll do your TCP. So the tax people have a beautiful opportunity right there just to do that. It's more on the audit side. How you do in FAR is going to dictate whether you go BAR or ISC. Or, hey, you know what? I'm going to do TCP because it's got an 83% pass rate, so I'm going TCP. That's up to you.
I would not recommend taking TCP if you don't like tax. Trust me, it's going to be very hard to pass the exam. There
Yeah,
are
yep, yep.
83% people who pass, but there are those 17% that don't. You
And
might
it
just
well, and
end
a
up
high
falling in that
correlation.
17%.
Yeah. Well, folks, watch those scores. And when you study for reg, if you like reg, you're doing well in reg, there's going to be a
Then take
high
a TCP.
correlation between your performance in reg and TCP, right? So you will have a barometer as to whether or not TCP makes sense based upon how you do in reg.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad I sort of give the same sort of guidance to my students. I tell them the same
That's
things.
great. Well, what do
That's
they
good.
say? Shabir, what's that old saying? Those geniuses, they think alike or something like that, right?
Absolutely. That's why I agree with you, Peter.
Awesome. So many geniuses. Let's all get to talking. All right. The second question I had in this segment, or if we're counting the eighth question that I'm going to ask you, is what is the most effective study tip for a student who's struggling or who's facing challenges in the CPA exam?
You're welcome to the club. It's challenging, right? The pass rates are what they are because it's a challenging exam, requires a lot of time. So just be willing to accept that. If it was a 99% pass rate, the credential would have no value. So it is challenging, but you can and you will do it. You just got to be patient. You got to be willing to put in the time to practice, and you got to persevere through those times where you're like, oh, I don't feel like I can do this. I can tell you right now, 90+% of the students I've taught for the past 30 years, there are times where everyone feels like, my gosh, how does anybody remember all this stuff? You feel overwhelmed, you take a step back, but remember this. If I pass this exam, you guys should be getting perfect scores. I am no smarter than anyone on this call, and Shubir can attest to that fact under oath. But I am not going to give up. So occasionally I get upset, but then I take a step back and say, okay, I can and I will do this. But folks, the practice, it's not just the volume of questions you work. A lot of people just want to crank out as many questions as they can, but they're not learning from their mistakes. And if they get a question right, they're celebrating. But did you get it right for the right reason? If you got a multiple choice question correct, but it took you 15 minutes, you don't got 15 minutes exam day. There's got it right. So you got to learn when you're practicing. That's what I love about UWorld and the software is that it looks not only at the volume of questions, but the percent correct. It's on a sliding scale. If you're doing, a ton of questions, but you're only getting 50% correct, I'm not impressed. You did a lot of questions, but you're not learning, obviously, from your mistakes. And then I got people who, there are 250 questions in the question bank. They do 30. They get a 95% and say, I'm done. No. That's too small of a sample size, right? So it's a combination of the volume of questions and the percent correct. So the beautiful thing is the Smart Path software is going to tell you, based upon actual candidates that have passed the exam on the first attempt, hit these benchmarks with volume of questions worked and percent correct, you can confidently move on to the next topic. Because believe it or not, you may see 200 questions on inventory and you're like, oh my gosh, do I have to work all 200? No. We might tell you that, hey, if you worked 130 and you got at least 78% correct, you may think, oh my gosh, I'm not doing well enough. But no, it's not you against some abstract piece of paper. It's you relative to everyone else. We might tell you that our candidates who passed on the first attempt, if they did 78% correct and worked that volume of questions, 94% of them passed on the first attempt. That's a hell of a confidence interval. You're now comfortable to move on to the next topic. So just please don't just crank out volume of questions. You got to learn from your mistakes. That's the beautiful value. And again, UWorld, their detailed explanatory answer, folks, second to none. You don't have to click back to go back. You can click back and look back at the lecture, but that's a waste of your valuable study time. Each answer choice has a very robust explanation why the right one's right, why the wrong ones are wrong, so that you can learn just right there and then you can move on. Saves a ton of time.
Yeah. So in essence, it's two things. Number one, you've got to practice. So from the Indian context, I'll tell you a lot of folks here in India, we're good with learning things. We're good with remembering because it's an imperative skill to pass an Indian exam. So we get really good at it by the time we clear out our schools and into our colleges or into our, graduations. But with that being said, the other aspect is to learn the skills of evaluation, analysis, application, which will require practice. That's the first thing. And the second thing is when you're doing your practice, it's important to show intellectual honesty. You've got to tell yourself, I got this right, sure, but why? Is it for the right reason or is it something else? And if you get something wrong, again, you got to learn from your mistakes. So doing the test bank and learning from your mistakes is the two things, the two tips that I think Peter was giving to us. And I think that makes just perfect sense. Am I right, Peter? Is that how you would
No,
put
no,
it?
you are, and I'm glad you brought up the analysis and the application, because folks, if you rush to do task-based simulations before you have a good grasp of the concept, again, you're going to be wasting valuable study time. The multiple choice are a great way to practice and master the basic concepts. Task-based simulations would be challenging even if it were an open book exam because of the volume of information that's thrown at you, all the exhibits you got to look at. So if you don't yet have a grasp of the basic fundamentals relating to that topic, you're going to waste tons of study time making silly mistakes. So you practice your multiple choice. As Rohan said, you're going to learn from your mistakes. Then you're going to apply that. The highest level of application is, okay, now I'm ready for the task-based simulations. And by the way, we have webinars all the time. Rohan's team does a great job at this. We're not going to just let you go off on your own into the wilderness and try a task-based simulation. We're going to show you, this is how you read it. This is how you set it up. You never start with the facts because you don't know what to do with all those facts. What are you going to open the exhibits for? What do I do with all this stuff? Legalize cheating. You go right to the questions first. What are the requirements? Then it gives you a feel for, oh, the topic is pensions. Okay, question number one, pension expense. Oh, yeah, my formula, service cost plus interest cost, blah, blah. You write down your formula. Then you can read the facts in context, knowing what's relevant and what you need to plug in. Now you're building that good momentum for that particular question, okay? And the other thing is, you got to learn good technique, folks. With the task-based simulations, when you open up testlet number 4, you're generally going to have 3 different problems in that one testlet. Do not work them in the order in which they're given, unless coincidentally that's the best order for you. Scan all 3 topics within that testlet. Work the one that's easiest for you first. Work the topic you like the least last. Because if you're going to rush and run out of time on a testlet, let's rush and run out of time on something you weren't going to do that well in anyway, right? So these are like the helpful tips. Rohan's team does a phenomenal job. So it's not just about the content mastery, it's how to take the CPA exam, how to take your knowledge and maximize points exam day, okay? So there's a lot involved in preparing for this exam. It's not just about memorizing, obviously. You all know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'm sure some of the students that are watching right now that have studied with us would now be relating to the 5 steps that I tell all my students to follow. And the point that you raised with TBS is absolutely correct. I've seen this over and over. If students go straight to the TBSs, they feel like it's too difficult, or they may have made a mistake joining in and doing CPA. But if they end up doing their MCQs well, they understand the topics well, and then they move on to doing their TBSs, the TBSs actually play an important role in binding the entire book together. All of the topics, all of the concepts come together to form your understanding. So, yeah, that's another pro tip. Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much, Peter. That was
Hey, you're
good.
welcome.
Okay.
I'm glad I'm useful. My wife just said, go downstairs, do something useful. I'm not useful in the house. Today I feel good. I got my dog sitting there looking at me. Bella, you're happy with me, right? I'm giving some good advice. My dog's very happy. She's wagging her tail.
Me too. Okay. Shubham, I'm sure you have a question there, right?
Yeah. So, Peter, is there any particular timetable that the CPA students need to follow if they're planning to complete their CPA in 1 year? I know
To
we still have
take
30 months window, but still, if we want to complete in 1 year.
Yeah, so this is where they got to rely upon your expertise, your team's expertise in putting together that study plan, right? That's step number 1, to sit down thoughtfully and say, how can I accomplish this in a 12-month period of time? So obviously they pick your brains. You look at what their performance has been historically in tax versus audit versus financial. And then another great thing about the software, the study planner, we recommend to our candidates, when you put together your study plan, if you're working, whether it be full-time or part-time, you share that study schedule. If you're working, in an accounting firm or wherever it may be in your profession, share that study plan. Does it make sense given your work schedule? Because your manager might tell you, hey, you know what? 2 months from now, you didn't even know you're going to be on a new engagement. It's going to require a lot of time. Study less there, but you're going to be unassigned in this window. You could study more there. So step number one is to meet with you and your team, give them that guidance to help them figure out what order, how much time on average it takes to study for FAR versus audit, very different game. And then when you put that study plan together, share it with your employer if you're working. Okay, this way you get their buy-in as to whether or not that study plan makes sense. And then share it with, what do you call it? Your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, your significant other. Let them know how busy you're going to be. All right, let them know for that 1 year period of time, I'm their significant other, okay? They need to go away and support you, give you a massage after you're done teaching, cook you a nice dinner. The last thing they should be doing is saying, you're a boring accountant, all you ever do is study, I'm going to go out, but let them go out and find somebody else. Because after you get that CPA, you'll be making so much more money, chances are you'd want to upgrade anyway. Isn't that right, Rohan?
I sure did. Absolutely. Okay. With that being said, we've come to the end of this segment as well, where we're talking about the study pattern, the study tips, and what your schedule should be. Frankly, you're absolutely right, Peter. It's not a one shoe fits everybody kind of a situation. Everybody has a different story, has a different situation, has a different set of constraints that need to be managed. And as such, you're absolutely right that we'd be happy to sit and draw up a study plan with an individual student that works best for them. With that being said, let me introduce the next segment, which is CPA in the market, where we're talking about more generic things. Like, for example, the first question that I have here is CPA still an emerging course, or has it established its presence in the market? Peter, what would be your opinion?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm at lots of different meetings with different firms across the US, and they're talking about how valuable it's been to be able to have the assistance of the folks in India in particular for them to outsource to, because it's just made the workload far more manageable given the shortage of potential CPAs and also demographics. I mean, you don't need to take my word for it, do a little research. The baby boomers who are all retiring, they still dominate the profession volume-wise. So the demand is there, but the supply is decreasing, so it's going to be even more valuable than it's been historically. But you need to be motivated. So I don't know the Indian market as well as you do, but I could tell you in the US, I always tell people when you work your internship or your first year at a firm, talk to the people who've been there 3 or 4 years and how often they're getting approached by what we call in the US headhunters. I don't know what you call them in India, but folks who are trying to recruit you to leave that firm to go elsewhere, right? Another job opportunity. But there's a stark contrast in the opportunities, the number of opportunities, and the salary potential for someone who has a CPA versus someone who does not have a CPA. Totally different trajectories and opportunities for the rest of your career. And you can say, Pete, I don't love public accounting. I'm not going to get certified to change my... I don't care if you like public accounting or not. If you have a degree in accounting, how could you not get certified? That's like going to law school and then never passing the bar exam. No one would ever do that. You've got to finish the job, folks, and do your research to see what those opportunities look like for you within India. And then if you desire to move elsewhere, what those opportunities are. That will motivate you to persevere, push through those times where you want to give up and then not give up and put in the time and effort. It pays back the rest of your career.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, Shom, this is yours, right? Question 11.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So India is the second largest market for CPAs outside the USA. What do you see would be India's role as the people supplier of the world?
It's like I said, in these meetings I've been attending, specific BDO Alliance, all the alliance members, dozens and dozens of firms throughout the US, and it's been invaluable to them. They just respect your work ethic, your desire to learn, the commitment. They truly see you as team members, whether you're fit. Because the beautiful thing is, right, with COVID, I mean, one of the benefits, the silver lining in that terrible cloud, with so many people working remotely, it's like, okay, we're used to working with people remotely, whether you're around the corner from me or you're on the opposite end of the globe, it doesn't matter. So it's become very, everybody's comfortable with working with remote and with coworkers who are not sitting at the desk across from them. And there's such tremendous respect for what you all do in supporting these firms, and then opportunities then maybe to come to the U.S. But if your desire is to stay in India and to continue to support these U.S. firms, they're absolutely loving it, raving about and your not only your job performance but performance on the exam. I mean, the motivation to get certified and to continue that career in public accounting, I mean, it's really second to none. You're every bit as talented, motivated. They just, I don't think they could survive without you guys. If you guys went on strike tomorrow, we should unionize India. Can I be the Jimmy Hoffa? I want to unionize India. We're going to go out on strike. We're going to triple your salary. No, you guys are doing amazing. So, yeah, I see the demand to continue to increase the comfort levels there, not only for the firms, but their clients. Like a lot of times, even on the tax side, there was worry that, whoa, you're outsourcing this. What does that mean for me in terms of quality? Now they have actual data to show, listen, this is every bit as good, if not better, than what we were getting done locally. And many times they, more efficiently priced, which saves the client money. They say, well, we could have this done here, but you're not going to have any better performance, but you're going to be paying a lot more for it, right? So it's a savings that gets passed on to the clients many times. So it's really, you guys are doing a spectacular job, and there's just tremendous respect across the firms and across the country for the service you all provide. So thank you. It's been invaluable to our profession.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your so supremely kind words. So happy to hear that.
Well, it's the truth. Not being kind, I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
Shubir, right? That's unusual. I'm actually telling the truth that you got to love it.
Absolutely. Rohan, take this as a pure compliment. Trust me.
I will. Although I'm not one of those people who's actually doing the serving for the US firms directly, but still, I shall take it. Okay. The next question I have, which is our last question for the evening, which is an explosive one, is about Trump. Trump being the president of US means that there's going to be new changes, new things that we can expect. I, for one, know that the rupee is going to keep falling as opposed to the dollar. But with that being said, what do you anticipate would be some of the major tax changes that Trump would want to introduce? And some of those would eventually spill over to international business as well. So what kind of an impact would he have?
Well, I think if you look at historically the two parties in the U.S. and the businesses sometimes are viewed negatively, they don't pay their fair share of taxes. So I think had the Democrats won, there's the risk that corporate tax rates could rise. But then they're likely, it's always more complicated than what meets the eye, right? So it sounds good in theory to tax more, but if they take their business then outside the U.S., you're losing a lot of jobs and the tax revenue that's generated from those jobs, right? So tax, Trump is more, the supply side view, right? If you want to grow the economy, let's lower the tax rates, give people, businesses an incentive to work harder, work smarter. And then the thought process, whether you agree or disagree, is that a rising tide is going to raise all boats, So I think the talk has been, it's keeping U.S. corporate tax rates competitive so that, U.S. businesses are willing and, to the extent able to, manufacture and produce their goods and services within the U.S. I think obviously he's a smart guy, surrounds himself with smart guys and recognizes the global economy. And I think there's a lot of talk and rhetoric about tariffs and what have you. But, I think what's good for the U.S. a lot of times is good for the rest of the world as we are buying the goods and services, right, that are produced around the world. We're a major purchaser. So they I think it's pro-business. I don't think there's any surprise there. I'm also of a belief that, when you give people an incentive to work harder and smarter, good things happen for all. And I hope that there's a way that wealth does get shared. I wish there was a way to fix, Jeff Bezos having the kind of incredible wealth he has, but then, the average worker at Amazon, I get that argument as well. They struggle sometimes and they should unionize. Call me, we'll all work out. But we got to coordinate this effort, right? We got to get some of that money back.
Unionize anybody, make me a partner, please.
but the best thing about Trump is I've got a lot of DJ mixes, right? So So you remember that song, Pump Up the Volume? It's no longer, it's
Yeah.
Trump up the volume, Trump up the volume, Trump. And not no longer Pump Up the Jam. Remember Pump Up the Jam? It's now Trump Up the Jam. You got to trump it up. Don't you know, trump it up. So I like it because it's good for my DJing. There wasn't many DJ mixes with Kamala. Like I couldn't get anything with Kamala, but I had a lot with Trump it up and Trump up the volume.
So you're just happy that he's president because it rhymes with your DJ base.
Trump up the jam. It's all about my DJ, man. It's all about my DJ business. So all good.
Yeah. Do you think he's gonna actually impose the tariffs that he's talking about on China?
You know, I got to be honest. I'm embarrassed to say I really don't know. You know what the issues are with the various trade partners around the world. Okay. So these things have a way of working themselves out. Is a lot of this, posturing to try to get a better deal or whatever. I guess it is, but like I said, if anything that hurts the U.S. economy is generally not going to be good for the rest of the world. But everything's about fairness, right? So there's a give and take, and what's fair to overall, get the best goods and services to be supplied around the world. Who's ever best positioned to provide that good or service at the best price, is generally what's good for the world's economy overall, right? So I hope whatever he does is fair and makes sense for both sides. A good deal is a fair deal. So I would hope with all his business experience that's his view on it as well. So. I'm optimistic, but I don't think, I think in the short term to get votes to say, I'm going to raise taxes sounds good in theory until those companies then take their businesses outside the U.S. and then all of a sudden there's less jobs, right? So it's just like the minimum wage, right? So when you teach the minimum wage, it's like there's good news and bad news. You raise the minimum wage, that's great. A lot of people are going to be willing to work, but there's not going to be as many people who are going to be employed at that higher wage rate. So, if you're fortunate enough to have a job at a higher rate, that's great. The question is, are there going to be enough people willing to pay that higher rate? Now is all of a sudden unemployment going to go up? So there's always pros and cons. It's that, what they give you in a soundbite in a 30-second commercial, when we know better, it's like, it's more complicated than that, right? So I hope he does what's right, what's fair for everyone around the world, so it works out for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, and frankly, the last time when he was president, it's not like he broke the system or anything. So I assume he's a pro business president, and he shall have his policies heard. But it's not necessary that everything he says would actually be enacted.
Yep. And insofar as our industry goes and what India supplies in services, not only in the accounting industry, but like I said, it's just so reliant upon the talent pool in India to, the shortfall that can't be met here. It's a win-win for both sides, and assuming you guys are getting fairly compensated for the service you're providing in India, given your cost of living there, man, it seems to be a win-win. Again, I'm not the expert in it. I'm a generalist, but from just that quick view at it, it looks like it is a win-win.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. Those are all my questions. I'm done. That's all I had to ask you today. And we can.
Do you want me to ask you any questions?
Hey, if you want to, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So, what's been your path? What's been your guiding path, so to speak, that's helped your students better prepare for the exam, passing it with less pain, maybe even with some joy?
Okay. Frankly, I have a 5-step process that I follow, which is derived quite literally from what you just told us. Like, for example, you should only do your TBSs, which is step 4, after having done your MCQs properly. So we follow that 5-step process, and we have a game plan call with our students where we connect with the students one-on-one and we enforce the 5 steps. And we follow up with them. So we'll catch you on a phone. We'll tell you you're supposed to complete your step 1, and the time allotted for that is, say, 30 days. So will you be able to do it? And the student says, yes, I might be able to do it. So then after 30 days, my teammates will actually call them and find out, were you able to complete your step 1? And if they were, then we'll start you off with step 2. If you weren't, we'll push you and ask you, how much more time do you need? Can you do it more quickly? So essentially, we've got people whose whole and sole job is to keep the sludge moving, essentially. So every student that comes through here is given a rigorous series of steps that they need to follow. And we enforce those steps. And then we check their preparation at the end of the steps. We also check their mock exam scores in the UWorld test bank. And then based on all of this, we decide if the student is actually prepared to take up the exam. If they are, we'll allow them to pay their exam fee and they'll go get to take the exam and they'll pass in one attempt. Most of them do. 99% of them do, in fact. But then if they're not ready, we will point out the areas of weakness that we're able to see, and we will then guide them with extra questions if need be, or extra reading if need be, to finish those particular topics, do them well, take up another mock exam, and then schedule their exams. So that's essentially
wonderful. So would you say, relative to your competitors, would you say this is one of the things that sets you apart from your major competitors, that individualized attention you give to every student who has an individual story and circumstances?
Frankly, yes, because see, the thing is, it's not as cheap to take up the CPA exam as it is for an American here in India. For us, the cost is in rupees, and with the dollar getting more expensive, the exams are only getting more expensive. So people can't really afford to fail these exams because you lose out on the fee that you paid. And for us, that's a significant sum of money. It's not something which is immaterial, but just a couple $100. It's a lot. So we wanted to make sure that people actually pass their exams in one go, because every institute in India will show you a certain amount of money that you need to pay to sit for the CPA exams. They'll give you a fee, but they won't tell you that this is the cost of doing it in one attempt. Because if you face a failure in this, then your cost goes up. They don't tell you that. But here at Edumont, we
the
tell
devil's in the
about this.
details, right? The devil's in the details. There might be a lower cost up front, but in the long run, sometimes you get what you pay for. You paid less up front, but then if you have to resit, it winds up becoming far more expensive.
Yeah. So essentially, that's the idea, that we want people to pass in one attempt. And the thing that sets us apart from our competitors is the fact that all of our results are one attempt results. So I've got people who got a 97 and I've got people who got a 75 as well. But they've all done it in one attempt. That is the thing that counts.
That's the most important thing, no doubt. And then I got to ask you this, and Leah, and I'll let you, I know we're pressed for time, but there's no better barometer of the success of a program than its growth rate, right? So I want you to just brag just for a second about yourself and your team and how your business has been growing exponentially given your success.
Hey, thank you so much about that compliment that you've given me in the form of that question. I'm not somebody who's braggadocious by nature, so I wouldn't want to do that. But I'll just say
I'll
this.
brag
Yes.
for you. I'll brag for you.
Go ahead, do it.
God, I can't get it. I don't want to steal your thunder, but no, it's very impressive. I think, look, the course sells itself, right? And when people succeed, this is still a word of mouth business, but via social media. And it's a testament to your performance. I think it's great if your potential client base knows the kind of feedback you've been getting.
Well, frankly, I think I give it to the students. I give the credit to the students who've been able to do it. I teach everybody the same, but some succeed more quickly than the others because some people have more will. So it's awesome to see how people have come together here, how folks are studying. Many of them are passing with great marks. For me, it's all just fun and it's a joyride, frankly. And I'm so thankful for it.
Good for you. Well, we do want to congratulate you. Shabir, did you want to add anything to that, my friend?
Absolutely. Edumont is a stellar partner of UWorld, and I think great testament to the success of your 5-point step as well, and working with students. And like you mentioned, getting close to that 99% pass rate, that's just really impressive. We're really proud to have you guys as partners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, with that being said, let me just conclude this session, although I had not planned for these wonderful questions that I've been asked. But with that being said, I'm just very happy that we've had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Peter Olinto and Mr. Shubir Khattu, who have actually, I don't know if it's done this the same thing for you, but they've done it for me. They've opened my thought process to a whole new world of possibilities. I just realized there's so much that I don't know that I need to find out now. And I usually come off feeling this way when I speak to Peter. He's just so much smarter than the most of us, than the rest of us.
Oh, no.
Although he claims he's not. Don't fall for it. He's lying. With that being said, thank you so much for giving us time, Peter. Thank you so much, Shubir, for giving us time. I hope the audience at home has gotten something valuable out of this. Thank you so much.